So to begin, I'll just cover a few basics. So a signal uh, is basically a variable that varies with respect to another independent variable. So, for example, in Figure 1, you can see on the left, you can see a continuous signal that's varying with respect to the variable on the x-axis. So, for example, if it's time, so this signal is varying with respect to time. And on the right here, you have the discretized version of that signal. That is, you sample the signal on the independent variables axis, so you get a discretized version of it. So in this workshop, I will be dealing with discrete signals. So some examples of 1D signals are x of t equals sine of t, y of t equals e to the power minus 2t. For those of you who aren't familiar with signals, 2D signals are basically an extension of 1D where um, the the signal variable varies with respect to two separate dimensions. For example, if you have the signal I of x comma y, you have the and I is the intensity. So you have the intensity varying with respect to two dimensions x and y. So a good example of this 2D signal is a grayscale image, where for example, if the horizontal axis is x and vertical axis is y, the intensities of the image are varying with respect to x and y. So this is a grayscale image is a 2D image example. So sparse signals are a type of signals whose coefficients mainly consist of zero elements, and there are a few non-zero elements. So an example of a sparse signal is shown in Figure 3. On the left, there is a one-dimensional sparse signal where there are many zero coefficients which are all lying on the red axis here, and a few non-zero coefficients present. On the right, this is a sparse image where so this is a 20 by 20 image, and that's why it looks pixelated. But most of the black areas here are zero coefficients, and that's why they're dark in color. And the white color or gray squares here are the non-zero coefficients. So in an image here, usually in a grayscale image, the range is taken to be, the amplitude values are taken to be between 0 and 255. So the lowest value will be 0, and that will correspond to black color, and the highest value will be 255, which corresponds to white color. So an important thing that must be noted when dealing with sparse signals is that the sparsity need not exist only in the time domain or the spatial domain for 1D or 2D signals respectively. So it can also exist in alternate domains such as Fourier, wavelet, or gradient domains, which we'll see later. So depending on the application of the sparsity, you'll be using it in different domains. So I've covered three important examples or applications of sparse signals here. So the first important application, the most commonly used one, is for signal compression for transmission and storage. So a good property of sparse signals is that there are very few non-zero coefficients over here. So you need lesser amount of storage space to store these non-zero coefficients compared to a non-sparse signal. So that concept plays a major role in signal compression, and very popular algorithm is called compressed sensing, which is based on this sparse concept. So the second important application that I have listed here is for neural networks. So neural networks nowadays, they're relying on sparsity for the weights of the hidden layers, because sparse hidden layers occupy less space, and sparse hidden layers also require lesser amount of time for calculations in a forward propagation. So that is one desirable property. And the second one is that the effectiveness of activation functions can be well explained. Some activation functions can be well explained through sparsity. For example, the ReLU activation function, if you're familiar with it, its effectiveness is actually based on the fact that it promotes sparsity. So the third application, which we will be exploring in this workshop, is signal denoising. So sparsity, a denoised signal will have sparse coefficients signal coefficients in some domains, for example, the gradient domain or the wavelet domain. So we will be exploring this area. So we will be covering the wavelet domain in this workshop. So before I talk about the wavelet domain, I just want to talk about how we get to the wavelet domain and why we're going to use it. So so for those of you who are not familiar with Fourier transform, it is a method of converting a signal's time domain representation to frequency domain representation. So it is like you represent the time domain signal as a sum of sinusoids, and in the frequency domain you plot the magnitude of these sinusoids and their corresponding frequencies. So equation 1 talks about the mathematical, it represents the mathematical formulation of a Fourier transform, and figure 4 shows a visual representation of a time domain rectangular pulse out here, and its corresponding frequency domain representation. For those of you who are familiar with this concept, this frequency domain representation is also known as the sinc pulse. So one problem with the Fourier transform is that it is unable to localize in time domain. So for example, if you want to know which parts of the signal have which frequency components, the Fourier transform is unable to do that. So for signals, for non-stationary signals that are dynamic, you're really unable to tell which part of the signal has which frequency components, and so that detail is very important for denoising, especially because when you're dealing with edges such as these images, when you're dealing with edges over here, you really want to be able to treat the frequency different here and frequency different here, for example, in the sky in the background, because this is constant, almost constant, but the edges over here have quickly varying data or signal, so the frequency domain will be different there, so they must be treated differently. So because of that, because the Fourier transform is unable to localize in time domain or spatial domain, the short time Fourier transform was introduced, or was it was adopted. So the short time Fourier transform is basically like you consider portions of the signal and find its corresponding Fourier transform. So in figure 5, you can see a signal here, and so you take a small portion of the signal and you treat it to be stationary here, and you find the Fourier transform of it. So once you find the Fourier transform, you move your window to the right and you compute the Fourier transform, and you consecutively do that for the entire signal. So equation 2 shows the modified form of equation 1 here, which includes phi, that is the window function. So in the simplest case, you'll be multiplying a rectangular pulse over here. That is the window function. So once you multiply a unit rectangular pulse of certain width, all the remaining signal data is made to 0. So you can calculate the short time Fourier transform, or the Fourier transform of this window. So although this does help us localize the frequency in the time domain, the resolution at which that localization happens still causes a problem. So this short time Fourier transform deals with a fixed representation of signal and frequency and time domain concepts of those axes. So because of that fixed representation, it causes certain problems when you want to deal with quickly varying signals and slow varying signals. So for example, if you use a larger window, you are having bad time resolution but very good frequency resolution, because you are looking at a larger portion of the signal to get a better idea about the frequency components in it. Similarly, if you look at a smaller area of the signal, you have very good time resolution but bad frequency resolution. So this trade-off is explained by the Gabor limit in equation 3, which is part of the Fourier uncertainty principle. So this fixed frequency time representation, resolution representation, is solved by the wavelet domain analysis. So the wavelet transform is also known as multi-resolution analysis, mainly because you treat quickly varying signals and slowly varying signals with different frequency and time resolutions. So to explain it in a very simple way, the wavelet transform is a method of representing a signal using wavelets such as these, such as the one in figure 6. These wavelets which are time shifted and compressed or dilated. So these actions allow you to represent the signal with varying levels of frequency and time resolution. So for example, if you have a slowly varying, so in many of the real world signals, what we desire is that we need quickly varying signals to have very good time resolution, and slowly varying signals to have we don't need that amount of precision or resolution. So as bad time resolution corresponds to very good frequency resolution, so that has been adopted here. So the figure 6 on the right, the image on the right hand side, is a spectrogram which represents the action. So the spectrogram is a frequency versus time plot. So at lower frequencies, the time resolution is bad, and basically we do not need a very high time resolution. But at higher frequencies, you can see that the time resolution, so these boxes represent the time resolution. Time resolution is very good. So equation 4 represents the mathematical representation of wavelet transform, and S and tau here represent the time shift and scaling operations. So scaling here is not amplitude scaling, but it's the amount you want to compress this wavelet or dilate the wavelet or widen the wavelet. So it's wide and how much you want to squeeze the wavelet. So this is the mathematical representation. So a discrete wavelet transform is the wavelet transform that you apply on a discrete signal, discretized signal. So a 1D discrete wavelet transform can be intuitively thought of as passing your signal through multiple filter banks, which filter the signal into high and low frequency components. So if in this example in figure 7, if you have a discrete signal x of n and you filter it into low frequency components g of n and high frequency components h of n, you're basically dividing. So this can be thought of as you're dividing the signal into two halves. So what these represent is actually you have only half the number of signal coefficients that you had originally. So at the end of this process over here, level 1 coefficients, you will have low and high frequency components. So that is known as computing the discrete wavelet transform for one level. So once you have high frequency components over here, you want to scrutinize the lower frequency components more. So you compute the discrete wavelet transform on these lower frequency components once again, because that's also a signal with half the number of coefficients to low and high frequency. So you keep doing that to n number of levels, how much depending on your application. So and that can be found out through some experiments which you perform. So this diagram represents an intuitive approach to how the discrete wavelet transform works through filter banks. If you want to extend that to 2 dimensions, you will be performing the same one-dimensional discrete wavelet transform along the column and row dimensions or directions. So if you have a signal over here, a 2D, if you have a grayscale image over here, you will compute the one-dimensional discrete wavelet transform along the column axis to obtain low frequency and high frequency components. This will result in half the number of coefficients on each side. So at the end of this, you would have computed only column wise. So you will have to do row wise also. So and row wise for each of them. So once again, low frequency and high frequency components are filtered out. So for example, if you have an image over here. This will give you high frequency components along the column axis, and this will give you low frequency components along the row axis. So W superscript V subscript psi of j will contain the wavelet coefficients representing the high frequency components along the column axis and the low frequency components along the row axis. So similarly, once you compute a two-dimensional discrete wavelet transform for one level, you will have four such matrices which contain the wavelet coefficients for different frequencies. So W psi of j will contain low along column, low frequency along the column, and low frequency along the rows. This will contain low along the column and high along the rows. So similarly, this will contain high and low, and this will contain high and high frequencies. So these frequencies are the ones that we have to process to denoise the image. So an important property of these wavelet coefficients, as I stated earlier, is that a noisy image has higher coefficients over here. So basically, WH psi of j, WV psi of j, and WD psi of j are not sparse. So we need to make these coefficients sparse before computing the inverse discrete wavelet transform and obtaining an image over here whose wavelet coefficients are sparser. So that would correspond to a denoised image. So that is the basic process of denoising the image. So how do we enforce the sparsity on those wavelet coefficients? So a very simple approach would be to use hard thresholding, which is basically like you say beyond a certain threshold, the coefficients of the signal will be considered as zero below a certain threshold, and beyond a certain threshold we will leave them untouched. So for example, if you have a signal of having just three coefficients, 3, 8, and 2, and if you want to hard threshold this signal with a threshold of 4, so as you go through the signal, so 3 is less than 4, so that would be considered as 0, 8 is greater than 4, so that would be retained as 8, and 2 is less than 4, so 0. So a hard threshold signal in this example would contain 0, 8, and 0. So you can see that this has been made sparse from a non-sparse signal. So, but although this works, it causes a few problems, and it's a bit inconvenient. The main problem it causes is that it forms artifacts in the image, final image after we perform the sparsity calculation, and it's difficult to control the amount of sparsity you want in your signal using this function. So an improvement to this would be the soft thresholding function, which is a more gentle approach to thresholding. So before I get into that, figure 9a represents the hard threshold function. So here all the values of the signal input that are between t and minus t will be considered 0, and all the values that are greater than t or less than minus t are retained as it is. So an improvement would be the soft thresholding function, where you make all the signal components below a certain threshold 0, but all those which are greater than that, you subtract t from it. So this results in a more effective form of thresholding and sparsity formation. So figure 9b represents the soft thresholding function. So in figure 10 shows the comparison between hard and soft thresholding for a given signal. So using this soft thresholding signal, we can iteratively, so that means we can apply the soft thresholding function repeatedly on a signal, and to enforce the sparsity in a particular domain. So this type of sparsity enforcement is done by an algorithm called the iterative shrinkage thresholding algorithm, or ISTA, the popular algorithm to enforce sparsity. And so this algorithm, when applied repeatedly in the wavelet domain, in our example, in our workshop here, will enforce sparsity and thereby denoise the image. So this is the overview. So what we have to do is we have to get the wavelet coefficients from an image and perform soft thresholding on it and get sparser wavelet coefficients. So this would be for one step, which I'll be covering further. You will understand this step further. So this is the overview of the image denoising process. So if we have, so this is the image, this is a noisy image. So in this workshop, I'll be covering additive white Gaussian noise, which is a type of noise in signal processing. So for simplicity, I've considered one single noise, but this wavelet domain denoising works for most types of noises to varying effects to varying effects. So this, if you assume this image, its vectorized representation to be y, then we can model the noisy process. So what we have to do is we have to model this process to obtain this clean image. So we say that if we assume that before getting corrupted by noise, our clean image was x, and while say transmission or while some processing, this x got corrupted by some noise e. So because it's additive white Gaussian noise, e is drawn from a normal distribution of zero mean and standard deviation sigma. So what that basically means is that e is consisting of random values which are added to a clean image to obtain a noisy image which corrupts the signal. So what we have to do is we have to obtain x from y. So this type of problem is known as an inverse problem, and it is commonly formulated as equations 5 and 6. So we formulate a cost function which takes in an image that is an intermediate solution. So what we do is we formulate this function so that we can minimize it to obtain a denoised function. So this cost function has two components, the first term and the second term. So the first term measures how closely you want your solution to be to the noisy image. So minimizing this first term will result in an image that is similar in structure to the original image. So you want to minimize this first term only to the extent that the underlying image structure is retained, but it doesn't retain the noise. So if you give a lot of priority to the first term, this algorithm will also make the reconstructed or denoised image so similar to the noisy image that it will also retain the noise in it. So the second term is the denoising part of the algorithm, which is basically the wavelet coefficients, and lambda represents the threshold at which you're going to soft threshold it. So giving a lot of importance and priority to the second term will result in denoising of this image, but it will distort it, and we will get a highly blurred image which loses a lot of its structure. So the key thing here is we need a trade-off between the first and second terms. So a trade-off between the first and second terms will result in a denoised image, and that's why this addition has been applied here. So equation 6 is the denoising process. So x star is the optimized solution. So basically this is an optimization problem. So we need to obtain the value of x for which j is minimum. So from mathematics, so this comes under that type of problem formulation, and j is a convex function. So because we have formulated it in this manner, we can apply a very popular optimization algorithm called gradient descent. So this is an iterative optimization algorithm, which means that we have to apply it consecutively or a number of times for it to find the minimum for a function. So for example, if we have the function j of w and it is a quadratic function in w, so that would mean that so we have a parabola type of function over here, and if we want to find this minimum, we start off with a random initialization for w somewhere, like anywhere. This is one example. It can even be here or here, or here. So using this random initialization, the approach towards the minimum based on the principle that a convex, the minimum of a convex function is can be obtained by progressing in the direction opposite to the gradient at that point. So all this, so I'm giving a more intuitive approach to this, but there is a lot of mathematics behind it, and it is a very popular algorithm. A lot of papers cover it. So if you are interested in the mathematics behind it, I strongly suggest you go through those papers. So so how this works is you go in the direction, you move in the direction opposite to the gradient at that point. So the gradient would be del J of W by del W at this point, say. So so as you move, as you keep performing this equation 7 for multiple iterations, where k goes from say 1 to n, and so you'll slowly move towards the minimum. Alpha here controls the speed at which you want to move to the minimum. A small alpha will make you move more slowly, and a large alpha might get you there quickly, but a very large alpha will actually be counterproductive, and it will lead to a divergence of this algorithm. So there's a mistake over here. It's supposed to be del J W subscript k by del W subscript k minus 1, sorry, k minus 1. So that is the gradient descent optimization algorithm. So applying this to the image denoising process for multiple dimensions. So this was for a single dimension of W. If we apply it to multiple dimensions, these are the steps that we will need to follow. So firstly, we need to initialize our solution x0 to any value. For this workshop, I've used 0, but it can be initialized to any value. N is the number of iterations for which you want your gradient descent algorithm to run, and alpha is the speed at which you want to arrive at. It's commonly called learning rate. So it's the speed at which you want to arrive at your solution. So this can be obtained by trial and error once you tune your algorithm. So in step 2, you iterate for a couple of n iterations, and in each iteration you compute the gradient at that point of your solution. Generalize it's xk minus 1, and you compute the gradient descent weight update step to obtain zk. Once you have done that, you have to perform denoising. So these 3 steps, 2.3, 2.4, 2.5, cover the denoising process of it. So basically 2.3, you convert zk to discrete wavelet transform domain. 2.4, you perform short thresholding to enforce sparsity. 2.5, you compute the inverse discrete wavelet transform to obtain an image xk which has wavelet coefficients is much sparser than xk minus 1, and its corresponding wavelet coefficients. So 2.2 actually covers the first term over here in equation 5. So if we differentiate g of x with respect to x, and if we consider only the first term, we will get x minus y. So that is what this 2.2 covers, and 2.3, 2.4, and 2.5 cover the differentiation and further processing of update of the second term over here. So if you are interested in the mathematics and the derivation behind it, you can follow the references that I've attached below. So this is the algorithm that we will be implementing. So before I go on to the implementation, do you have any questions?
Could you explain DWT again? Like, why do we split it into rows and columns?
Yeah, I'll go through it. So yeah, so we're splitting it into rows and columns because a two-dimensional signal is basically it's something like it's something like a combination of two one-dimensional signals. So an image is varying one-dimensionally along column and row both, right? So you have to compute if you treat them as one-dimensional signals, you'll be computing the DWT along the column and row axis separately. So this is just a way to think about it, how to think about its working, understand it much better. Anyone else have any questions? You can type it in the chat also if you prefer that. Yeah. Okay. Just a second. And then I'll get that back. Yeah. Yeah. So that splitting into high and low frequency components actually arises because of the this method of representation of frequency and time. So what in the case of discrete wavelet transform, what actually happens is that we divide the frequency consecutively, say f by 2, f by 4, and f by 8, and so on. So processing in using those halved frequencies simplifies the computation and the analysis. So that is the primary reason it's done for discrete wavelet transform. So if there are no more doubts, I think we can move on to the practical section.
I have a doubt. What if we consider the image as a 1D matrix? So will the algorithm work in the same way?
1D matrix as
Like if we flatten the image? And
yes.
then consider.
Yes. These algorithms are applicable to 1D and 2D and multi-dimensional images, signals as well. So even if you vectorize the image to get, say, if you have a 20 by 20 image and you vectorize it to 400 cross 1, the signal denoising process will be same. So this signal denoising will work even for audio signals, but to varying extents of there might be some algorithms which are better, might not work as well as images, but that will depend on the data, but it can be done. Okay, anyone else? Do you have any doubts? Okay, then I think we can move on to the code, implementing the code. So I'll just share my screen in a second. So you can also open that file, and I'll just so in the chat I've included one repository. You can download the code, you can download that repository as a zip file, and you can run it locally if you would prefer that. So I'll just open code. Yeah, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, so if you guys have this open, you can run it together. So yeah, so now I'll just clone the repository so that we can access the image that's present in the repository. So yeah, this is the image that we will be dealing with. I think it's too big to be displayed on Colab, but if you download it, you can get a better idea about what we will be dealing with. So for those of you who aren't familiar with, who are new to Python, so this import command imports necessary libraries so that you can simplify your coding process. So I've included 5 libraries over here. NumPy is a library that is a very popular library for quick numerical computations. Matplotlib is a library to visualize graphs, signals, and various data basically. And CV2 is the second version of the OpenCV library. So this library is used to perform some image processing tasks, such as reading an image, resizing image, etc. And this SSIM method or function is going to be used to compute the structural similarity index metric. I'll talk about this a bit later once we get to that. And PyWT is the PyWavelet library. So this helps us compute the discrete wavelet transform. So this abstracts that, so we don't have to implement it. So I'll get to this library, and it's the function that we're going to use when we come to that. So firstly we'll go through a couple of helper functions that we'll define, and then go to the image denoising loop. So the soft thresholding mathematical representation here has been implemented in Python. So what this basically does is this you find the maximum between absolute of x and t. So if that's less than 0, that means it means this condition is satisfied, mod x is less than t, and so then this whole term becomes 0, and 0 into anything 0 into this term will be 0. So that covers the second condition. The first condition is covered because np.maximum of a positive quantity comma 0 will yield us that positive quantity, and np.sign of x will take care of the sign. So for those values of x that are less than minus t, that's you still got it covered. So this image was also there previously. So we'll write a function here. I've included a function here that performs the conversion to discrete wavelet transform, and soft thresholding, and conversion back, inverse discrete wavelet transform. So for that we will use the PyWavelet library, and so the PyWavelet library at any given level, what it returns when you compute the discrete wavelet transform will be these 4, right? So CA corresponds to W phi of j, CH corresponds to WH psi of j, CV WV psi of j, and CD WD psi of j. So these actually, because they are downsampled by 2, what you get is this kind of image representation. So what we have to soft threshold are actually CH, CD, and CV, because they consist of high frequency components. So if you perform multi-level discrete wavelet transform, which we will be doing, so at the first level we will be getting these coefficients. Then we consider only this image to be for the next discrete wavelet transform computation, and we get further number of coefficients. So in this method, pywt wave DC2, it computes the multi-level discrete wavelet transform. So here I've used the Haar wavelet. So this is a type of wavelet. It's very common, and so the choice of wavelet will be dependent upon the task. So this is a bit experimental. So you'll have to go through a couple of iterations to see which is good. So for simplicity, I've just used the Haar wavelet, and so basically, this is a bit. So this function accepts an image, the image that you want to convert, the Haar wavelet, and the number of levels you want to go through. So this first CA coefficient we will not have to perform soft thresholding because the noise, we want to enforce sparsity in these three high frequency components. So we retain that coefficient. And so what we do is we'll make a list of all the coefficients that we'll retain, so that we can use those coefficients to compute the inverse discrete wavelet transform. So I'm storing all that in L, and I iterate through the number of levels, and at each level I compute the soft thresholding. I soft threshold each of those coefficients, and at the end of each level I store it in a tuple of with these three elements, and I append that to L. So at the end, once I'm done with that, I'll have L, which has the low frequency component over here and the high frequency components with sparsity enforced, and we compute the inverse discrete wavelet transform. So this is the cost function and the gradients. So as I said, for this scenario, we'll be considering the first term for gradient, for the gradient calculation, and the second term is for the performance of the discrete wavelet transform and denoising step. So so if you want the mathematics behind it, I'm just mentioning it again. Once, please refer to the references that I have included at the end of the presentation, which I'll be sharing right after this workshop. So if we differentiate this, we get x minus y, which is basically the intermediate solution minus the noisy image, right? So that's what I've done here. So this gradient function just accepts the denoised image or the intermediate solution and the noisy image, and you compute the difference. Two metrics that we'll be using to compute the quality of our denoising ability. Peak signal to noise ratio is a metric that is used to measure how clean your image is and the quality of your denoising ability. So that measures the power of the maximum possible power. That means if you're dealing with an image that has intensity range between 0 and 255, your maximum pixel value will be 255. So and your maximum possible power will be 255 squared for 1 pixel, right? So and we divide that by the mean square error. So this is one formula to calculate the peak signal to noise ratio. And structural similarity index is another metric that's commonly used to judge the similarity between images. It's very similar to how the human eye judges similarity. It takes into consideration a few other sub-metrics such as luminance, contrast, and structure of the image. So for this structural similarity index, we have an image already. We have a function already called compare SSIM or SSIM that I've imported here. For PSNR, we will be using this. We have defined a function over here to calculate that. So we compute the mean square error, the difference between two images, square them and find the mean, and we perform this calculation. So now I think we can get to running the code. I'll just run everything once again. Yeah. So now we'll So this cv2.imread function reads an image, and I mentioned 0 here because I want it to be grayscale. So here we're dealing with a grayscale image. If you want to extend the same denoising ability to say an RGB image, you will have to perform this denoising operation along the three dimensions separately for R, G, and B, and then concatenate them. Yeah. So once we have that, so because this image resolution is big, I'm resizing it to a simpler size, 256 by 256, and I'm typecasting it to float because our calculations will require floating point, to store floating point data. If you have this in say uint, it will it will lose a lot of data. You'll be losing a lot of data. So here I'm just displaying the image. So because we don't have a noisy image already, so I'll just so we're simulating the noise. So using this formula, y is equal to x plus e. So we draw e from a normal distribution. So if we define mean and standard deviation, I have defined mean to be 0 and standard deviation to be 20. I extract the noise e using this numpy function, and I add the noise to the ground truth image, which is our original image over here. So I'm going to call this ground truth. So once we have this noisy image, for the sake of to ensure that if you want to save this image later, it might cause some white patches if you don't clip the values between 0 and 255. So I'm just clipping the values here. Usually it doesn't cause any problem, even if you don't, but I've just done it in case you want to save the image and it causes some problems like that. So if we run this section, we're going to get this ground truth image and its comparative noisy image with standard deviation 20 noise added. So now that we have our noisy image, we can apply the denoising algorithm. So I have tuned it myself here, T and N. So N is the learning rate or alpha, which I was using earlier, and T is the threshold, and levels of 4. I've set it to 4, but 3 also works well. But these are all experimental. It requires a few iterations, say 3 to 4 iterations, to get to zero in on a good value for these parameters. So I've set the number of iterations to be 20. So running this, so before I run this, I'll just explain the code. So here G, we calculate the gradient. We get our intermediate calculation by computing the gradient descent update step. We perform denoising in wavelet domain, that is by using a sparsity calculation, and I've included 2 variables over here so that we can calculate the PSNR. I've normalized it to ensure it's between 0 and 1, because the dynamic range of denoised image norm was varying a lot. So I've just normalized this so it makes the calculation easier. So running this code, so running this code will result in a denoised image. So as you can see, this the image in the middle is has lesser amount of noise compared to the image on the right. It is actually it's done a pretty good job at it. This PSNR value, when you are running it, it might be different because of the random noise added. So I think usually it will be between 22 to 25. So if you run it multiple times, you'll get different values of PSNR here, mainly because of the randomness of the noise that's added. So finally, if you run this code snippet here, you'll get the PSNR, PSNR value before denoising and PSNR after denoising. So you can see there's approximately almost 2 dB, a little less than that gain, and the SSIM gain present. So SSIM judges the similarity between 0 and 1. So an SSIM of 0 is completely dissimilar and 1 is completely similar. So this is the denoising process. So basically, when you run this code, this cell over here, what is happening is that the noisy image, you're processing the noisy image in wavelet domain and enforcing sparsity in it and converting it back. So iteratively, when you do that, you obtain a denoised image over here. So here you can see at iteration 0 itself, it has pretty much solved the whole problem. But I had run it for many iterations because when I was tuning it, it was much slower. But this works well too. So so it all depends upon the tuning process. So this shows that at one step itself, it's reaching a pretty good. It's converging. So if you use different values of T, LVL or level here, N, and a different value of standard deviation, you will get different values here in your iteration. So there is also a chance that it might actually, from a bad PSNR, it might improve. So, or it might stay the same like this. So yeah, so that is the end of the workshop. I'm sorry, I think, yeah, so it's been an hour. So, any questions? You can put it up in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask. I'm not really familiar what lens flare is. Could you elaborate on that? Vibor. So yeah, so Vibor, could you explain what lens flare is? I'm not really sure what it is. Okay. Yeah, so I don't know if it works on that type of noise. It has been tested. This type of wavelet denoising has been tested for a number such as Rayleigh, salt and pepper, additive white Gaussian, etc. So I'm not really sure if it does work for that that type of noise. It would be like I think a good way to see if it works or not would be to just run the algorithm on it quickly. I haven't really read any research on that. Shreyas Rao has asked a question. Wouldn't the effectiveness depend on what values are chosen by np.random? Yeah, to a certain extent, but the denoising ability can be seen across a few noise levels. So I'll just share my screen once again. This is again. Yeah, so this gain in PSNR that you're going to see will it will vary for the noise level, standard deviation that you choose, and the structure of the image. So it is image dependent and it is dependent upon the noise. So given a certain standard deviation, because the randomness, there will be some value, it will vary. So for example, if I run this once again here, so with different amount of random noise, you can see that the gain is more. So here I'm getting much better gain. So this is almost 2.5 dB improvement compared to the previous improvement. So that range will be there, and that it will also vary depending upon the amount of noise you add. That is standard deviation. Any other questions? Higher PSNR is better. Higher PSNR will mean that you have lower amount of noise in your denoised image. So basically, when we compute the PSNR, we are the mean square error at the in the denominator in the formulation corresponds to the noise power. So that if you have lesser amount of noise power, that means you have lesser amount of noise in your image, and that will correspond to a higher PSNR. Shravani has asked if these resources will be shared on Telegram on the Telegram channel. Yes, right after this, once we conclude this meet, I'll put it up. I'll put up the presentation, and this meeting is also being recorded, so that will be put up on YouTube. Okay, I think if nobody else has any question, I think we can wrap this workshop. Thanks a lot, guys, for coming. I hope it wasn't a lot to take in. I've included references at the end of the presentation, which I'll be sharing. Please go through it for a much better mathematical understanding of it. Even if you are not really interested in domain, I'm sure I think the math will really like you. Like you will really be able to appreciate it better. Sujay has asked a question: are better choices of J possible? So the choice of J was influenced by the fact. So a few factors come into play when you choose J. Firstly, you want to make sure that it's a convex function if you want to apply the gradient descent algorithm. There are different choices of J that you can use. If it's non-convex, you'll have to apply different optimization algorithms such as ADMM. And one more thing is the norm of the. I'll just share my screen so that you can understand better. Yeah. So another thing that influences the choice of J is this norm over here in equation 5. So this is a unit norm calculation that we're doing, and this unit norm calculation actually influences the soft thresholding step. So if you go through the mathematical derivation about how we're going to be getting the gradient descent update step and the soft thresholding step from equation 5, you'll actually realize why we're going to be using this single norm. But other norms can also be used. They will require different computation. Okay, so guys, any more questions?
I don't think any more questions are there, so I think we can wrap this up.
Okay, sure.
So thank you, Anirudh. The session was really insightful, and I hope like people would have enjoyed it and even learned a lot from it. Thanks a lot, guys, for joining the session.